T is for Time Flows and Trust Grows by Starlight Tinker. Quod verum est in numeros. The truth lies in numbers. Unlike philosophy or divination, the study of statistics sampled properly and analyzed correctly can allow us to predict the outcome of any scenario with an eerie measure of clarity. Take, for example, the following. A well-known thought experiment proposed by anamorphic spell pioneer Starswell the Beard. Consider that the pillar of equestrian society, concept of trustworthiness. As an initial premise, we may surmise that there are those amongst the general populace who are not worthy, in a general sense of our trust, hence the existence of the concept as a recognizable state of being. It would not exist as such if it were an immutable constant. With that as a basis, we can state that if all creatures ever to walk upon this fair land, only a finite, non-unity, non-zero proportion will ever be trustworthy, to any extent. Of that number, only a finite, non-unity, non-zero proportion will be approximate at an appropriate time to he or she in need of a trustworthy ally. Of that number, only a finite, non-unity, non-zero proportion scenarios will exist within the trustworthiness of the subject, may be maintained or guaranteed through a given interaction. And of that number, only a finite, non-unity, non-zero proportion will remain trustworthy for a significant length of time in the face of worldly temptation and strife, for the interaction to begin in the first place. Finally, one must factor in the probability analysis themselves being trustworthy, subject to the environmental variables described above, which of course may be represented by a finite, non-unity, non-zero fraction. By similarly multiplying these fractions by one another, the analysis is left with the mean probability of a random sentient creature being trustworthy at some arbitrary time for some arbitrary purpose. Disappointingly enough, the result of this thought experiment, even with the most optimistic estimates, does not produce a non-eligible probability. It teaches us that, statistically speaking, you can't trust anybody. Statistical Analysis for Eggheads, 13th edition, Carolina University Press. I could have told you that, mused Caliber, as he lazily hoofed through the eaten blackened textbook. A light breeze caught the edge of the tome's decrepit pages, ruffling it gently as the Earth Pony's eyes continued to scan the book's contents. Certainly wasn't the best purchase he ever made, that was for sure. Even when that blasted traitor made it back to Trotfell, the first thing Caliber was going to do was get his caps back. In the distance, a shot shuttling rang out across the wasteland. Caliber's ears perked up immediately, and his head snapped towards the right side of the sound, his eyes keenly scanning the horizon for trouble. His perch atop Trotfell's tallest guard tower afforded him an excellent view of the plain around town, and he was quickly able to discern the telltale crimson flash of laser weapons in the distance. He rose from his position on the floor of the tower and grabbed his rifle, flipping the safety catch to off position before settling down to his markspoint stance. Through the scope of the sniper rifle, Caliber was able to make out two Pegasus ponies with a small skywagon, being set upon by a much larger force of raiders. They were still quite far off, so he couldn't see their faces, but he was able to surmise that they weren't wearing body armor, and were instead outfitted with smart and almost entirely untarnished, unclean flight suits. Sure sign of the do-gooders of the new volunteer corps. He'd been hearing about so much lately. The group had been turning up in conversations all over Equestria, seemingly the Grand Pegasus Enclave's way of reconnecting with the poor, downtrodden ponies of the surface world. Caliber was dubious of these apparent intentions, so much that he would often advise his acquaintances, for he had no friends to speak of, to avoid contact with them outright, regardless of whatever help they seemed to be offering. He continued to regard the scene playing out before his scope. The Pegasi were holding their own against the raiders, deftly dodging their poorly coordinated attempts at bringing the pair down. More red flashes merged with the pale glow of the afternoon sky, and no less than 3 of the raiders dropped to the ground, clutching smoking wounds on their hides. Caliber felt that one of his eyebrows rose slightly as his opinion of the Pegasi combatants rose further and further. These two were fighting like no ponies he had ever seen. It was as if they had some sort of cause to fight for. As if they had to win or all would be lost forever. Why didn't they just ditch the wagon and fly away? He had no idea. Caliber silently thought about what could possibly be so important, and was running through the possibility in his head when a stern, authoritative voice grabbed his attention from behind. "Caliber!" shouted Sage, the mayor of Trotfell, as he galloped up onto the landing of the tower. "What's going on? Are we under attack?" "No, sir." Not quite. Caliber responded languidly, running his tongue around his mouth in expressive disinterest. Looks like that there volunteer lot have bit up more than they could chew. I have to say, though, they're doing pretty well for a bunch of flappers. The Volunteer Corps, said Sage, his eyes widening in surprise. They never come to this region before. This could be an attempt to open trade or diplomatic relations with the North. We should help them. At that, Sage rounded on his elderly, though still entirely functional hose, and started quickly towards the staircase back to ground level. I'll round up the duty guards. Cover them, Caliber! Sage shouted over his shoulder as he disappeared down the stairs. Ugh. Caliber gawked internally. Cover them? We haven't a clue who or what they want. We can't just treat them as if... His monologue was interrupted mid-sentence by a sudden piercing scream coming from the direction of the conflict. As Caliber pressed his eye up to his scope again, he saw a bulky, pastel-colored streak falling towards the ground, quickly followed by a far more coordinated swath of lime green. One of the Pegasi had been hit, causing both them and the skywagon they were hauling hurled towards the earth. Their companion, still in control of his or her flight, was risking a head-on collision with the ground in order to arrest the other's fall, or save the wagon. At this point, Caliber wasn't sure what was more worth to them. A small, uncomfortable pang of sadness worked its way to Caliber's face as he unconsciously lined up one of the remaining raiders in sight of his rifle. He was experiencing a sensation not entirely unlike regret and non-acting suitor, an uncharacteristic emotion which was entirely failing to sit right with him. And that wasn't working enough. The suffocating explosions of the raider's head did absolutely nothing to alter his feelings. 3 succeeded and equally lethal gunshots rang out across the blighted tundra, cleaving flesh from bone and separating the raiders from the mortal existence as Caliber put his skills as an expert marksman to good use. An almighty crash resounded a moment later, just as he was about to dispatch a penultimate assistant, and he quickly turned his scope towards it. To his dismay and surprise, he realized he was looking at the splattered remains of the wagon pilot and their companion, both of whom had apparently been killed while saving the enchanted container from smashing against the ground. Grinding his teeth in a turgid combination of bewilderment and rage, Caliber fired twice more, neatly puncturing the final 2 raiders' heads. The corpses flopped to the ground, just as Sage's contingent of guards arrived at the scene. Caliber could make out carrying Hart, Trofel's youngest doctor, and 2 nurses attending to the crashed Pegasi, while the guards poked and pried into the waiter's bodies, examining his hoofwork, ensuring that they had nothing else planned for today. Why did they die for that wagon? Caliber asked himself as he continued to peer through the telescopic sight affixed to his rifle. They could have distant escape. What the hell could be so important? Before that thought could finish crossing his mind, Caliber noticed a sudden change in the assembled group of ponies surrounding the skywagon. All at once, they whipped their heads towards the downed vehicle, as Sage made a beeline for the cracked hats on his side, pulling it open savagely as he raised it. Caliber peered intently into his lens, Lily discussed magnification factor to increase as Sage buried his head in the wagon's interior. A moment later, he emerged with a light blue bundle of fabric held securely in his teeth, and he immediately motioned for Carrying Heart to attend him. Those present proceeded to cluster around the strange packets, their heads bowed in expressions of intense interest as Caliber, once again, began to clench his jaw in frustration at having his view obscured. After what seemed like an eternity of waiting, the cluster of ponies finally dispersed, allowing Carrying Heart and Sage to begin galloping like equines, possessed back towards Trofell Gates. Caliber refocused his scope, following the pair with smooth, practiced motions of a seasoned sniper. They drew closer with every passing second. It wasn't long before Caliber could make out what Trofell's mayor and doctor were carrying. Caliber's eyes widened in shock, and his heart dropped in his gut as the image of the bundle was finally resolved. There, Carrying Heart's motherly base, was a scared and newly orphaned Pegasus foal. 5 years later. Caliber let out a gentle breath as he squeezed the trigger set between his jaws. A thunderous shudder resonated throughout his body as a single high-velocity round left the weapon's barrel, but he was too used to the sensation to be fazed by it. A full 600 yards away, a single blood sprite suddenly exploded into a pus-green cloud coupe. Caliber gently relaxed the strong, resilient muscles of his shoulder as he rose from a distance. "Whoa!" cooed the bright Pegasus feeling behind him, as he pulled a pair of well-used binoculars away from her face. "That was amazing! Where did you learn to sit like that?" "Practice," Caliber shrugged, as he flipped the safety cats back on the opposition. "By the time I'm done with you, kid, I expect you to be able to manage that too." "By the time you're done with me?" the little filly repeated, cocking her head to one side. "You're going to teach me how to shoot, but I don't need a real gun. All I got is one of those rubber-soled BB rifles." "Who's been teaching you English?" Caliber asked as he busied himself with an old footlocker, secured to the floor of the guard tower's upper platform. "Because they're not doing a very good job. You're getting tenses mixed up," replied the filly, now confused. "What's a tense?" "You said you don't have a real gun," Caliber responded, grasping a crudely wrapped object on his four legs. "Well, you should have said you didn't have a real gun." The filly's eyes widened into a pair of adorable glaring orbs, full of anticipation and wonderment as Caliber's intent became apparent. As he gasped, her words brimming with excitement. "Yep," replied Caliber, as he hooked the parcel over to the tiny mare. "Happy birthday, Moon." "Oh my gosh!" cried Moon Shao, as she tore at the shelf its 200-year-old wrapping paper surrounding Caliber's present. Thank you! A matter of seconds later, Moon was hungrily taking in every single little feature of her new 22 caliber rifle, from the wheel around the inside to the action of the firing bolt. When he was sure she wouldn't notice, Caliber allowed himself the slightest of smiles at the filly's delight, was almost able to eclipse the deep guilt that he still held in his heart. The last 5 years had been a challenge for Caliber. The choice he made on the day of Moon's orphaning had haunted him ever since. He was reminded every single day that, had he shown some concern for the Volunteer Corps, poised to distress and acted sooner, Moonshine might still have her parents, and wouldn't be confined to the surface world. As it was, though, the unfortunate little Pegasus had been denied her mother and father, and the Corps had never set foot or wing in Trottingham since. Caliber shivered as he regarded the pastel blue filly in front of him. Despite the pure, tangible joy that her young heart was reveling in, he was still inexorably reminded of the horrific 3-hour period that followed the incident all those years ago. He lay there, frozen atop the guard tower, tears streaming down his face at the tragedy he had a hoof in. A timorous, angry sort of sadness gripped him until Sage, having noticed Caliber's absence from the town below, ventured up to the guard tower to find him. "Well," Caliber said briskly, as he tried in vain to snap himself out of his mood. "Shall we get into target practice then?" "Oh yeah!" the Moon cried, as he flopped onto the floor, readying her new weapon with the skill of a seasoned BB gun specialist and the grace of a dead swan. Caliber smiled once again at her boundless enthusiasm as he settled himself beside her, put his own gun to one side, picking up the binoculars. He began to scan the horizon, acting as the young filly spotter, and quickly zeroed in on the targets he wanted her to focus on. "Oh my," he said loudly at the moment of silence. "Looks like there's some raiders on the prowl. Check your 1 o'clock, Boone, quickly, before they get away." "Raiders?" The happy little Marks Point squealed, joining in the game. "Where? You won't get past me!" "At 1 o'clock, replied Caliber. "Remember, we talked about giving combat directions using a clock face." Moon denied uncertainly. "There was some one local time, right? But not really time. Like, where to look, because it's never really—" "That way," Caliber grumbled, as he nudged the barrel of her rifle towards the correct bearing. "Oh!" Philly replied, her cheeks flushing as the bubblegum hue of the bear said, "Yeah, right, I knew that." Moon adjusted her tiny, skinny shoulders and settled the persistence he had observed from the town snipers assumed so many times before. Her eyes narrowed to slits and her tongue began to peek out atop her lip as he focused her mind on steadying the rifle. She suddenly exclaimed, as her eyes pointed in Caliber's direction, "You really knew something out there!" "Is there now?" The older buck responded, chuckling to himself. "Well then, you understood before he gets too close to town, hadn't you?" "Yes, sir!" Moon replied, as he slammed her magazine into her rifle, locking the firing bolt in place with a flourish and taking the trigger enthusiastically in her mouth. No more than 2 seconds elapsed before gunshots began to noisily pierce the otherwise quiet wasteland afternoon. Bullets ricocheted off of buckets and embedded themselves in scattering timbers as Moon defended Trotfell against the ravenous, oncoming horde of fence posts that Caliber assembled for her. "Yeah, that's it," he shouted proudly, as Moon scored body hit after body hit, mortally wounding what could have potentially been a dozen murderous raiders. Good girl, Moon. Remember, though, you should always strive for a headshot. In a combat situation, dispatching your opponent quickly is often the key to fit.
What's dispatching mean?
Little Pegasus asked without turning her head, cleanly cleaving Calibur's rhetoric in two as he continued to expend ammunition. Fancy word for killing. Calibur responded, after sighing heavily and rolling his eyes with frustration. You could use it for talking about mail as well. You know, sent it to these places. But it's mostly a fancy word for popping somebody.
Okay,
Moon replied, quickly busying herself once more with imaginary guard duties. Calibur caught himself staring at the little mare as she continued to attack the targets he had set up for her. She was falling into a competent rhythm, firing more accurately and reloading quicker with every repetition. Young Mark's pony couldn't help but flush with pride as his new protege improved before its very eyes. 2 years later.
one for you!
Moon said to herself triumphantly as a bucket head was launched into the air. A cool breeze meandered gently across the guard platform as the sniper student began to line up her next shot. Calibur sat back on his haunches, electing not to observe his student directly. His confidence in her ability was matched only by his pride in her development. He looked out instead over the wall of the guard tower, watching as Moon expertly punctured the myriad of objects just beyond Trumfelse's gate. Since the first assembling the small target raids 2 years previously, Calibur had expanded and improved it at every opportunity, incorporating reviews and salvaged raider barding to make targets more realistic for his promising young apprentice. In the comparatively short time between that moment and his first meeting her, Calibur had developed a relationship with Moonshell that was deeper and happier than any he had before. He spent the majority of his spare time doting on her as if she were his own child, imparting worldly wisdom here and heartfelt gifts there. The firing range was the first of apprentices, of course. It was now used by practically every pony for the target practice, but there had been others along the way. They included combat barring that Calibur had personally host-stitched, although he'd rather shoot you than admit picking up any tools of seamstresses, and a firing mechanism for a rifle, so well preserved it could have fetched more than the annual guard's salary if openly traded.
One for you!
Moon repeated, accomplishing another feat of ballistic accuracy only seconds later. How's your father? Calibur asked quietly, as Moon continued her practice. Haven't seen him in a few days.
Oh, he's okay,
Moon replied without so much as a twist of her rifle.
He's trying to deal with all the increased raider activity in the area, so I haven't seen much of him lately.
Yeah, mused Calibur. They're getting bolder every day. How many hits are you at now, Moon?
37.
Philly replied. And misses?
Nada.
Good girl, Calibur replied, smiling as he checked his son's progress through the cloud layer. I think we call that a successful day's practice. How about you take one more to enter your chamber, and we go get some grub? Moon sighed, tugging in annoyance as her session was called to a close, but knew all too well that would be in store for her if she made a fuss. Calibur may have been a great teacher, and her father a kind and caring leader, but by Celestia they were scary when you crossed them. She released the magazine from her gun, and was customary during her training sessions, lined up one last shot in order to expend the final round in the rifle's firing chamber. Moon spied the first target she could make out in the range, a brand new rust-red raider mannequin that was swaying wildly in the wind. She wondered for a moment why she hadn't noticed it before, but forgot the thought as soon as she brought the scope up to her eye.
In one part,
she began. Suddenly, mid-sentence, just before the large eyes, wide into possible saucers.
Calibur, why's that one moving like that?
Calibur responded as he pulled his own eyes away from Moon and returned to the binoculars. What do you mean moving? I don't see. What the hell? The pair turned to guard briefly another. Difference in their ages forgotten, and any semblance of formality dismissed as the scene before them played out. 100 feet below the guard tower platform, a single equine figure was falling over his own hooves, half dazed as he tried in vain to stay upright. Little as he, whoever he was, had traveled the length of the world, and only just then decided to take a rest, following his fatigue to totally overtake him as he slipped and wobbled repeatedly to Calibur's improvised target range. It's a cult, Calibur said to No Pony, in particular as he went through the binoculars ad. He's a big lad, but definitely a young'un. Looks like he's carrying a pump action, nothing else besides.
Well, what's wrong with his hide?
Moon asked, her voice wavering as he held onto her new rifle for dear life.
Looks like he's
covered in blood, Caliber whispered as he slowly dropped the binoculars to the floor of the platform. He's soaked head to hoof in it. Caliber never got on well with Foles. Moon was an exception, of course, but even between the two fast friends, whom the other guards had begun to telling the sniper and the sci-fi buff, there had still been profound moments of tension. Sometimes Caliber would say something not meant for a child's ear. Sometimes Moon would overstep her bounds as the Marksboy's apprentice. Regardless of what brought them about, though, there were always moments that would become clear to everyone in earshot that Caliber still had a long way to go when it came to kids. So, dear reader, you can imagine this discomfort and distress of seeing one so young, smeared with the arterial spray of at least a half a dozen other ponies, falling over himself with fatigue, not but 200 yards from what, as far as he was concerned, was the steadfast pace in the world. A jarring mechanical clunk popped Caliber's bubble of introspection as Moon slammed into a fresh magazine to her gun. He watched silently, his brow furrowed with discontent as the now practiced apprentice silently brought her rifle to her shoulder and took in a breath. Caliber knew all too well that was a deliberate, stable inhalation as a death knell for the pony down below. Next time Moon's lungs moved, she would exhale, and doing so would squeeze the trigger of her rifle, her lower jaw, firing with absolute precision a sharpened, aerodynamically styled shard of hot metal straight into the Colt's skull. Colt turned his head, his perception of the world around him having slowed to a visceral crawl, looked at the Colt below. Something was wrong with this. He knew it. Deep in his gut, he felt the rumblings of another tragedy taking hold. Caliber had taught Moon everything he knew about guarding a settlement in the Equestrian wasteland. It was finally beginning to show. His failure to defend their parents had led him to adopting the age-old mantra, shoot first, ask questions later. Although given the way he had taught Moon, shoot first, shoot second, and only then think about asking questions might have been a more appropriate summary of his learnings. In a single, dark moment of enlightenment, Caliber felt his heart shudder as a humongous weight of realization settled upon his shoulders. In that morbid, shining instant, all of his questions were answered, and all his fears were confirmed. He realized with horror that this was his fault. Caliber worked hard to right the mistake of yesteryear, nearly failing to fire his weapon when it was needed most, and set about making sure he would never be repeated, going so far as to take Moon on as apprentice, resolute that he would never know the agony he had known for 7 years earlier. But alas, in his zealous pursuit of righting his own wrongs, he had overcompensating, priming Moon to mar her young life with a new disaster. He tried to shoot, and shoot again until all was silent and dead, totally disregarding the lesson that he should have learned on that fateful day. A lesson he only just understood a whole 7 years later. It was about trust, that implied, unspoken built-in trust that a broken society like Equestria needed so desperately. Why were the volunteer corps ponies so close to Trothville when they attacked? Answer: because they had flown towards Trothville so that the settlement's guards could cover them. They had trusted that sniper on duty. Caliber would help them in their time of need. And he had failed, completely and utterly, to do so. But what about this cult? This crazy, shambling, blood-soaked cult. This poor kid with his Raider shotgun shell cutie mark on his flank. The end of a jet-high ringing around his head. The entrails of his most recent victims kiked all over his hide. Why was he here? Why had he wandered so close to the settlement like Trothville? Was it really Jet? Was he just another doped-up raider who scored a hit after a massacre, followed the pig dragon to his doom? Or was there something more? Could it have been that he had seen Trothville in the distance and trusted in his wounded, desperate stare that his residents would aid him? Could it be another side to his story? That by some miracle, he was a survivor of some sort of massacre? It didn't matter either way, because Caliber couldn't take that chance. The world sped up again as Moon's lungs began to contract, resulting in a tightening of her jaw. While mostly worthy of old Hong Kong-style martial arts play, Caliber slipped his foreleg towards Moon, deftly smacking the barrel of her rifle just as he pulled the trigger. The round ricocheted off with the guard tower ceiling, twice more off the walls before it finally came to rest. Moon turned to her mentor, eyes morphing to fiery, accusatory pulls as she roared out,
What are you doing?
Seeing thunder without respect.
I was about to bag my first raider, and now he might... Caliber, what's wrong?
Caliber is standing in his diminutive student evenly for several seconds. not quite ready to defend his actions, when he suddenly noticed how unbelievably tired he was. He felt he had just put around 100 miles. His breathing was labored, and his head was beginning to pound, as if someone was gently pressing against his temples with their hose. He stumbled backwards, falling to the guard tower floor as Moon galloped to his side. She was crying, Caliber noticed. When she spoke, her voice was muffled somehow, as if his ears weren't working properly. What's happening? Caliber wondered himself as his vision began to blur. Why am I? Oh, is that why? As he focused on Moon's tear-stained face, Caliber became aware of the myriad of colors playing and dancing his field of vision. Of course, there were dark, grayish tones of the guard tower and the filthy glow of the sky. And of course, there were the pleasing, baby blue ones he associated so warmly with the moonshine, the wondrous pale silver that made up her eyes. When all the stimuli fell to the wayside of Caliber's considerations, when he noticed the newest color to be thrust upon his eye's palette. Red. He was covered in deep red. Deep, dark, foreboding red. Black like the death, and yet warm like life. He sleepily swung his hoof over his chest as Moon darted to the speech tube and attached to the platform's lip. Caliber heard what sounded like loud, shouted syllables being barred to the tarnished brass cone on the end of the pipe as he drew his foreleg back and forth across his hide. The texture was entirely new and altogether wrong. All wet and sticky. Maybe it was treacle? Maybe it had something to do with the hole. The new one, in his back. The hole he didn't remember being there before. Maybe the two Pegasi would know. Maybe they recognized him from before, and help him to find out where all that red was coming from. Caliber was glad he remembered him, but he found it hard to ask him his question, or indeed form any coherent thoughts at all. Moon had vanished now, and so had the guard tower. Even the red words were drifting away. All that remained were the two gratitude-laden faces of the Pegasi, and hushed whiteness all around. Caliber felt his face stretched into a smile as he sighed for the last time. Somehow he knew that, in the end at least, he had done well. 24 hours later. Moonshine sat atop the guard tower alone, her rifle in pieces on the floor as she carried a far older weapon in her hose. She was still crying heavily, stirring slightly of every emotionally agonizing breath as a figure slyly said to the dark tower. I thought I'd find you here, said Chase as he gently as he commands. Moonshine looked up towards her adopted father, allowing the waning moonlight to cast the wet, salty trails that ran underneath her eyes. Her lower lip trembled as the elder buck's soft, epitheliated eyes took her and her sorrow in.
Keep away,
Moon said, voice quavering, as her father moved to take a step forward.
I'll only hurt you if you come too close.
I don't think you will, Sage replied simply as he sat down on the platform floor. You're not the type, Mo.
But I am!
Moon shouted, fresh tears flowing from her eyes.
I killed Caliber, I did that! No, I'm never gonna see him again.
That's enough, Sage said quietly, his tongue conveying all of the required authority. Moon closed her mouth with a wince and hugged Caliber's rifle tightly as Sage moved closer despite her warning. I don't think you're a killer, Mo, Sage said softly. Caliber's gone because he didn't want any pony to die unnecessarily today.
What do you mean?
Moon asked, wavering voice with savory symbol. I'm talking about the cult you were about to shoot, Sage said. He wasn't a raider. In fact, I think he might have just survived a run-in with them.
You mean you brought him inside?
Moon screamed as she rose to her host, momentarily towering over her father.
He could have been anything. A raider, a slaver, a cannibal. You just let him in? What are you thinking? What would Caliber die for if he had been dangerous?
Sage looked up at his daughter, a harsh expression of disappointment on his face. Are you finished? He asked quietly, causing Moon to shrink back to her regular size.
If he had...
She began, her voice having reduced to a whisper.
He hadn't been appeared. Caliber might still be alive.
Yes, that's true, Sage replied. But he did. If Caliber hadn't acted, the cult would now be dead. You would have an instant's blood on your hose for the rest of your life. Moon hid her face in her hose, her shoulders shuddering with new sobs as she retreated to the corner of the platform. What happened today was important, Sage continued as he moved to sit beside Moon. Did Caliber ever tell you why he was so fond of you?
No.
Moon said, wiping her tears from her foreleg. He was a sniper on duty when your birth parents were killed. He failed to save them, took it upon himself to put it right by helping to raise you.
Really?
Moon asked helplessly, as fresh tears welled up under her eyes.
Does this make me miss him more?
I know, Mo. Sage cooed as he took the little filling in his brace. It's okay, love. It's okay. I'm not saying all this to upset you. I'm saying because you need to understand how wonderful today truly was.
What?
Miss screeched angrily as her outraged foreleg put her father far away.
Wonderful. How can you say something like that?
Because it's true, Sage replied, as he measured a genuine, teary passion worked his way to his voice. Caliber taught you to fight, to eliminate every and any threat as soon as it reared its head. But one thing he could never teach you was when not to fight. Don't you see, Mo? He gave us life so you could be a better pony. So you can learn the lesson he spent years learning. Moon didn't make a move or make a sound for several minutes. Her eyes fixed to the floor as she could stare at her father's wisdom. Under a long silence, Sage rose to his host with a sigh, and began to trot slowly towards the tower staircase. Make of Caliber's actions what you will, he said, just before he began to descend the stairs. But I still think of what he did was pretty wonderful. With that, the silver-maned buck climbed down off the platform, leaving only Moon on top of the tower. She blinked once, as she continued to process everything she had just learned, and slowly began to raise her head. Her eyes landed on scattered components of her destroyed 22 Colt rifle, spread out across the platform. As she blinked once more, Silent began to gather the pieces together, screwing, clicking, launching them all back in position. A few minutes passed as soon Moon was once again holding the rifle that Caliber had so proudly given her. With an entirely neutral expression on her face, she slung the weapon over her neck and onto her back, and began to make her way down to the town below. By the time she made it to the ground, Moon had made a decision. She decided she would never again ascend to our tower, nor she would ever take on guard duty. If there was ever a threat to her town, or her father, or any pony she loved, she would deal with it, but not with her rifle trigger between her teeth. She looked back at Trotfield's tallest tower, aside as the moonlight caught sight of the barrel of Caliber's rifle, propped up against the platform wall for all to see. With an enlivening breath, Moon nodded to herself, said a short yet entirely heartfelt prayer to the gods on Caliber's behalf. At that, she turned her back to the tower, made her way towards Trotfield's hospital, intent on meeting the strange, shotgun-wearing cult from the north. Her result had hardened with every hoof, and the little filly quickly broke into a confident, rejuvenating gallop. At the right old age of 8, Moonchild vowed never again to let the fear of others drive her into violence. She would trust them, and she would love them, and she would make sure they would never harm her. Because at that point, they would no longer be her enemies. They would be her friends.
And at that point, her cutie mark appeared.